Hi everyone and welcome back to the channel. This week's Wargaming terrain tutorial, we're going to be looking at making a really simple billboard for the table. Now this one does have quite a few details on it. We'll be going through all the steps of how I did this one. It's a little bit longer as well, so I'll put some chapters down in the progress bar for you if you'd like to navigate through it that way. Now you will recognize the face on this billboard. This is Leif from Devs and Dice. He's been helping out the channel recently and he's been a great sport and provided an image for our billboard this week. So I do suggest you go check him out on his channel. He has some really great tips on painting miniatures and also basing, and I understand he will be making some terrain really soon, so that's quite exciting. I do want to quickly shout out to my Patreon supporters as well. Thank you very much for your help. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit like and subscribe. If you have any questions at all, please feel free to leave a comment and I will respond to you as soon as I can. Alright, let's get started. Alright guys, so for this build today we're going to be using some fairly simple materials as usual. For the main billboard structure I'll be using foam board as the backing, and I've also got a small sheet of 1mm thick balsa wood here which I'm going to be using for the frame. Now you could probably switch out these materials if you like. Simple cardboard construction would work just as well, I believe, in this. Most of this will be covered up anyway as far as the foam board goes, so you could certainly use some cardboard there instead. Now for the frame of this billboard I'm just cutting a few strips here. Now you can see here I got a new craft knife. This one came to me from Army Painter. I really appreciate them sending me that. It's really great of them to support small channels like mine. Now you will see me use a few Army Painter products throughout this video here. It's really great to be able to test these out, see how they go against what I'm usually using, which is just found objects or handmade items. So it's really nice to be able to get a good comparison of what these branded products are like. So once I've got these strips cut for the frame of my billboard, all I'm going to do is stick these on. Like I said, I want these protruding out the front a little bit, but I do want them flush at the back. So make sure when you stick these on that you have got that set up, and make sure you've got a front and a back defined for your billboard here before you get too carried away. Now I'm just using PVA glue to glue on the frame here. Now you can obviously use hot glue. I didn't in this case. Just find the hot glue can sometimes squeeze out and give you little bubbles of glue around the front. I did want this to be rather clean and not have that on there, so I am going to be using this PVA glue for this. One side effect of that though is that the balsa wood tends to want to warp once you get it in contact with that wet PVA. So the best way I found to sort of combat that is use some small pins and just pin that balsa wood straight into the side. Those holes for the pins won't show through once we remove them and the glue is dry. Now for the base of this I'm going to be using some more scraps of foam board here. I'm just going to give this a bit of an angled cut and shape it down to, it's got to be slightly larger than the actual billboard itself, obviously for the basing and for the frame to go on, and the supports to fit in as well. I am going to build it up a little bit because I do want the posts for this billboard to be embedded into the foam, so I do need a little bit of support there. So what I'm going to do is build up 2 decent layers here, and then I'm also going to add a couple of small little pieces where I expect those posts to be pushed into the foam. Like I said, I just want this to be almost freestanding, even though I will be able to put some supports on the back to hold it up in if I need to. So you can see now I've got the pieces ready for this to go together. Now this base is really simple. Again, I'm going to use some PVA glue as opposed to hot glue. Hot glue can melt that surface, especially on the larger surfaces like that, so you want to make sure that it is contacted correctly. Now I want to say a big thank you to Leif again. As you can see, he sent this image over to me for use on the billboard today. This is a great image. It's perfect for what I was looking for. I've just printed that out on an inkjet printer. Now I'm slowly running out of ink, so it wasn't even the best printout, but thankfully I'll be weathering this up as well, so it doesn't matter too much. You should be able to find plenty of billboard images or create your own quite simply. I'm just going to glue this straight down with some PVA glue. You do want to make sure that you get this PVA glue fairly evenly spread out across the billboard though before you apply the picture. This just makes sure you don't have too many bubbles and certainly don't have the edges peeling up, which you don't really want. Now once you've got the glue for these all dry, we can start working on these posts. Now I'm going to have 3 posts in there, and I'm going to be using some small balsa wood blocks here. Now these ones I've cut a little bit longer than I expect to use. That's always the best way to go. You can't sort of add on extra bits if you find it's too short, but it's a lot easier to trim them down if you need to. So one thing I'm going to do to pierce this foam board for the base is I'm actually going to take one of the scraps of the balsa that I've got there, and I'm going to sharpen the point up just a little bit so that I can pierce this into the foam. Now I'm going to need to also just widen those holes a little bit with the craft knife, just so that when I push in this post it will spread quite nicely and not distort the foam too much. Now don't worry too much if your balsa wood pin goes through the base. Doesn't matter if there's holes under there. You don't want to go all the way through though. So once you've got that in place and you can dry fit in your first couple of posts, we're going to sort of measure up the billboard itself and make sure that it will be at the height we want. Always keep in mind the scale you're working to so that you can make sure that this is going to look right at the end of the day. So I've just trimmed those posts down a little bit so that this billboard's a bit closer to the ground. And just remember, everything here is still dry fit, it's not glued in. What I'm doing now is just marking at the top of the billboard where those posts are going to sit. And once I get it out and I lay it down, I'm going to just put a line there, so when I hot glue these on, I'll be able to know exactly where to put these posts down, because with this hot glue you will need to put it down pretty quickly before that glue sets. Now we'll do that for both these posts here. You'll notice I haven't put the middle post in yet. This is the reason here because I want this to line up perfectly with that middle hole. So what I'm going to do is just dry fit those posts in again and measure it up against the billboard. Again, I'll draw my line and then apply my hot glue and glue on that middle post. This just makes sure that everything lines up. I don't have any holes in the wrong places or posts in the wrong spot. Once you've got that glued and dry fit in there, we can start again to look at our supports for the back. I've just used that little piece of balsa I had before, and I've just cut it down and put some small angles on there. The good thing about balsa is it's nice and soft, so you can certainly use a craft knife here and just get this sort of put into place and fit in there nicely. You shouldn't need to worry too much about how perfect these angles are. Once we glue them in there, it's really going to do the trick just fine. Now you might have seen me use this trick before in a previous video. I'm just using a bit of hacksaw blade here to weather up these posts and the timbers on the billboard. Because it's balsa, you'll just be able to run this over a couple of times and it'll put some nice grooves in there, and it will really give that effect of weathered wood. Now because of the balsa being so soft, it will sort of tear up some of the grains on that on these posts, so you might need to just give it a quick sanding as well. And I've also gone over and done all the posts on the back of the billboard. I didn't worry about the outside, that should be fine. What I'm going to do here now is I want the back of this billboard to be sort of covered in boards. So what I'm going to do is, using my 1mm thick balsa again, I'm just going to cut this down into what I think is about the right size of timber planks, and we're going to cut these down to fit into all these little gaps on the back of the billboard. When you're doing this, make sure that you sort of take it in sections. So you want to glue little bits at a time just to make sure everything fits and it's going to look right. You might have a small gap at the bottom of the billboard, but that'll be fine. You'll be able to cut small slithers of balsa to fit in there. Now when you come to do these two middle sections, what I found was a really cool idea was to just cut these at slightly different lengths. So overall they'll be the same, but we want to sort of show a couple of joints in some of these boards where they've come together. So you'll see here I'm using a full length board for this gap, and the next one here I'll use two smaller pieces. When we come to paint this up and weather it, these will really stand out a bit and give that extra little bit of detail. I think these sorts of things, while optional, can really help sell the idea of the back of this billboard being planks of wood. So when we come to glue this in, you want to put a little bit of PVA glue into each of the holes for the posts, and also apply a little bit of PVA glue to each of the posts at the bottom there, just so that it has got plenty of glue contact. And now we can come and add our supports. Now you'll see here I've got a few pins in the base here. This is just to allow the supports something to rest on when you do place them in place with the glue. It stops them from sliding down the base and sort of getting out of position. So you'll be able to remove those as soon as that glue's dry. Now underneath the billboard I did want to have some lattice work, so I found this granny grating at the craft store. This stuff's really easy to cut with a pair of scissors. One thing you want to do when you're measuring up your cut, you want to cut it diagonally so it does look like lattice, and you just want to make sure that the shortest edge of that cut is as long as the entire piece of lattice that you want to use. Now I do have some mounds where the posts go here, so I need to make an allowance for that when I cut this granny grating and putting it in place, so it doesn't have anything sort of pushing it out. I want it to be nice and flat in there. So make sure you trim that up so that it does sit over the top of those little foam board mounds that we have at the base of the posts. And once you got that in place and the length is right, Just give it a quick prime. I found it easier to do this first off so that you don't end up with any gaps in that lattice work as far as the paintwork goes. So I've just primed it up with some spray primer and put it in place, and I'm just going to put a couple of little pieces of balsa on the sides here just to frame up that lattice work. And when you put these in place, you want to make sure that they are long enough to just sort of sit in there under their own weight, just so that when you glue them in, you don't have to hold them. You don't really want to use super glue at that point because it can kind of get all over the lattice work and fill in the holes. When you do try to remove that, it may take off the paint as well. So I just found it best to use a little bit of PVA glue on the base and then press these pieces in. You can go back in and add a little tiny drop of super glue at the top joint of those little supports on the outside of the lattice. So now that we've got that sorted, what we can do here is just give it a quick coat down the bottom, all around that foam board. We want to give it a quick coat. I've got Mod Podge and black paint here, thinned down with a little bit of water as well. What this will do is just give us a nice priming over the foam, and also give it a bit of protection and toughen it up a little bit. So once you've got that base primed and dried, the next thing you want to do is we're going to paint this timber. So I'm just using some simple craft paint here, just some burnt umber and some sienna. These will just mix in together with a little bit of water, and I'm just going to go over all the timbers here. I wouldn't think you need to use anything more than craft paint here. We're going to be weathering this up down the track, but we just want a nice sort of priming coat of brown on there just to know where we're starting. Now, as for the picture on the billboard here, weathering up and sort of peeling some bits off is really important, I think, to get the overall look of this being an abandoned billboard, really old and weathered. Going for a bit of a wasteland look here, so don't be afraid to peel up some of the edges, peel off a little bit and scratch the surface of this billboard just to make it look like it is weathered. Now, I don't want to go too far and sort of scratch up Leif's face there, or the image too much, but you'll see once we get the weathering started on this, it's going to start looking really good, especially with a little bit of tearing and things like that on the picture. To weather this, I've just used this same technique that I use on the concrete, and you've seen me use on the shipping containers and previous builds I've done. This is just really watered down burnt umber craft paint, and all I'm doing here is just sort of adding some water runs down the front of this picture. Now it looks like it's going on quite dark there, but that's just because it's quite wet. On the paper it does stand out initially, but once it dries it really sort of fades into it, so you may need to do this a couple of times, give it a few coats, and just get this to look exactly the way you want. So it's best to go in there, nice thin paint, add these little bits of water running down the picture, but for now that's looking pretty good. What I want to do is add in a couple of bullet holes on here as well. So just simply using a ballpoint pen, I'm going to go in and place a few holes here and there. You don't want to overdo this step, just a small detail on the side or a few of these holes is more than enough to kind of sell that. What you do want to do though is maybe widen some of those holes with the end of a paintbrush. And like I said, the ballpoint pen will give you a nice starting hole, and then a little push with something slightly larger, like the end of the paintbrush you can see I'm using there. That'll just give a slightly bigger impression in the front of that billboard. And once you put those in, it's important to weather them as well, so we assume there's water's going to pool and sort of run down from those bullet holes. So we do want to add in a little bit of extra weathering at the base of each of those, so it looks like the water has run down from there. So make sure you add that step because it will really help to sell those bullet holes in that picture. Again, I'm just going in and adding a few more details to the weathering. You can see where we're up to here. It's by no means finished, but it's certainly coming along. That picture of Leif is perfect. Anyway, so what I'm doing now is just giving the base here. I'm going to cover up this black prime that we've done. I'm going to just cover it up with, again, some burnt umber and a little bit of sienna, some varying mixes of this. I'm going to try and blend it all together. Most of this will be covered up, but I do want to get a brown base onto this rather than the black base. Now once that's dried, I'm going to get a little bit of a mix of white and black here and just get a grey dry brushing going over some of these timbers. Now this is a really light dry brushing, don't overdo this. It's easy to sort of make this look like you've painted it, so you want to be very careful adding this grey. Just a little bit is going to look really good. It's not hard to overdo it. Now I did want to try a new thing that I saw on Leif's channel, which was using some paintbrushes to make some long static grass, some long grass tufts. So I've got some really old cheap brushes here that I'll never use, and I've just cut the end off, added a little dab of super glue to hold all the strands together at the base, and then just go in with some scissors and trim them up so you've got some slightly different lengths of grass on it, and you'll see shortly that they actually turned out really good. Now I'm going to start adding in some more details onto this base. So a bit of gravel, a bit of battleground rocks onto this one. So I'm just getting some watered PVA glue here and just adding a few patches where I want this gravel to sit. You can see here I've got this army paint of battleground rocks, and this is actually really good stuff. It's just it's like a medium grained sand or gravel, I guess. That seems to be a really good size for the scale that we're going for in this build. Now it's easy to apply there, as you can see. Once you let that dry, I'm going to actually go in here and just add a little tree to the side. I did this in my tree build a little while ago, just a little bit of glue on the base and then press straight in. That was just a tweak from the garden, but I think it looks pretty effective there. Now you can see here I'm using some more battleground rocks to add in. I'll show you these ones in just a moment. These rocks looked really good. You can use anything you like, really. I found these are actually perfect. I didn't really need to paint these up either. I will be using some dry pigments shortly to sort of give some color to the base here, but I found that these looked almost perfect as they were. A little bit of dry pigment was all I needed onto this gravel and these rocks to get the colors that I wanted. So that's those battleground rocks you can see there. And this is the dry pigment I picked up at the art store the other day. This stuff was actually really cheap. I grabbed a couple of shades of it. It turned out to be a lot cheaper than I expected. Also picked up just a really nice soft brush to apply it. But you'll see that this, rather than painting it, this actually gave it a really nice sort of dusty look, which is exactly what I wanted for this. Like I've said, I wanted this to be a bit of a wasteland, sort of a desert scene, so I wanted to try and see if I could get something a little bit dustier going on here, which is why I've tried this dry pigment out. Now this is the first time I've ever used dry pigment for anything, so if you see me doing something incorrectly here, you know, just be aware I don't really know what I'm doing with this stuff. So I found it worked fine in the end, so the outcome was all right. I don't know if the application was, but certainly the outcome was what I wanted. So if you've got any suggestions for using this stuff, please leave me a comment below. You can see here I've got a slightly lighter pigment that I'm applying here just to kind of blend it in and give a bit of variation. I found that it blended really well with the slightly darker pigment, and I didn't have to do too much more than this, just apply a few different areas of different colors, and it really came out really nicely, as you can see. Like I said with those rocks, I didn't end up painting them in any way. I just gave them a little bit of a light brushing with the pigment, and they will blend together, as you'll see at the end of the video. Now when it comes to sealing in this pigment, I wasn't too sure which way to go, but I just got a small dropper and a little bit of isopropyl alcohol, and just went around it and lightly put in small drops to cover all of that pigment that I put on. Now I will go over again with a very light amount of pigment over the top once this is all dried, but I felt this might seal it in alright. It didn't dull it down too much. I mean, obviously putting the alcohol on does dull it down a little bit, but yeah, a little bit of a dry brush over with the pigments at the very end of this build, and it brought it back really nicely, and it's not messy at all. It doesn't seem to come off. It seems to sit there pretty well. So here you can see it's all dried up now. I'm going to add another different colored grass tuft on here. These ones are the Deadland tufts. These are quite grey, and they did sort of stand out a bit, but I did want a bit more variation in this base. Now again, the dry pigments, if you give them a light dusting over this stuff, these grass tufts, they will help to blend them in. It's not going to dull them down completely, but that's not exactly what I want. I don't want this to be all one shade of orange or brown. I do want a little bit of variation in this build, so having these Deadland tufts go on there was perfect. I just felt the green tuft wasn't probably the best for this one, but as you'll see in the pictures, these ones I think blended in really nicely and definitely fit the scene quite well. There's a few different sizes there we can use, so you know, it's not hard to get a nice bit of variation. Just be careful where you place these. As with most things on this build, you don't want to overdo anything. So here you can see it's starting to come together really nice. You might notice I've got a bit of dry pigment on the trunks of the trees as well. That just helps blend it in and sell that sort of dusty sort of feel that I'm going for with this build. Now the next thing I'm going to try and do here is add in a little bit of static grass. Now the only stuff I could find was this dead grass looking stuff, just generic static grass. It was just in my bits box from a while back. I did use it in the tree build as well, and I'm also using my homemade static grass applicator. I'll put a link to the video for this one above. It does work fine. It's not the easiest thing to use. I mean, I'm sure the commercial brands and stuff are probably a little bit easier than this one, but it does the job, and I mean, it's nice and cheap, so you can't really complain with that. Now applying this was pretty simple. Just put down a little bit of watered down PVA where you want this grass to be applied, or to be stuck down, and then you can just go ahead and shake that over the top. So long as you got those wires in place and the thing turned on, it does a perfect job. So I've just gone across the front here and a little bit at the back as well, and applied this static grass. Initial thoughts on this, it's like most things, it doesn't really fit in initially, but as we go back towards the end and get some of that pigment and sort of brush it around a little bit, it really does bring all these elements together and really does kind of make everything fit in nicely. So this grass, definitely an optional step, this one. You could just get away with the rocks and sand, and you know, that would have looked perfect as well. I just wanted to try and add a little bit more detail to this base, just to cover up some of those bare sections. So there you can see that grass in place there. Like I said, it is standing out quite a bit there, but with a little bit of dry pigment, as you can see here, it's all come together extremely well. So thank you very much everyone for watching. Thank you to all my Patreon supporters for your support, and if you enjoyed this video, please remember to hit like and subscribe. If you've got any questions or suggestions or comments about the builds at all, please remember to leave me a comment. I will get back to you as soon as I can. It's been a lot of fun, this one. Thanks very much. See you soon.